Caledonia dispute in Ontario has been an open wound in the body politic now for, what, 5 years, with numerous innocent victims of violence, intimidation in our civilized, law-abiding country. Christie Blatchford is one of the finest journalists I know, and I'm delighted that she wrote the book on this issue. Welcome to you, my love.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And I meant that. I mean, I've read you for years, and we've argued a few times that, my golly, you write like an angel.
Oh, well, thanks. I mostly feel like I write like a pygmy or something.
Oh, shut up. But you write like an angel about a hellish issue. You know, I read this book again for this interview, and it's hard to believe that this is going on in a country as fine and noble as this. For the uninitiated, tell us about Caledonia.
Sure. Caledonia began in February of 2006 when a small group of protesters from the Six Nations Reserve in southwestern Ontario walked onto a piece of land that they said belonged to them. The Ontario Provincial Police were immediately sent into a state of paralysis, didn't know what to do, treated it right away as the reclamation, not as an unlawful protest, which of course it was. And as a result, the group of protesters, occupiers, grew every day. The OPP did nothing, stalled several court-ordered injunctions to remove them. And finally, on the sort of last day of expiry of this most recent injunction, they swept in with an ill-conceived raid in the pre-dawn. They were successfully driven off by a large crowd of occupiers. The OPP left with their tails between their legs, never to return. For the next 4 years, they didn't even police the streets, the provincially owned streets, some of them, that surround the area. And after the successful booting out of the cops, there was a period of about, I guess, almost a month, maybe a little more. I can't remember now. I haven't read this book recently since I wrote it. But there was a period of enormous lawlessness and violence. I mean, every time the police, the OPP, turned a blind eye to minor acts of Native wrongdoing, it emboldened the occupiers to do more of them. Most people will probably remember the torching of a bridge, the leveling of a hydro station, which put the area into darkness for 3 days, the beating up of innocent civilians who had made the mistake of wandering by. And as a reminder that of just how awful this was, last week in a court in Cayuga, Ontario, not far from Caledonia, a young Native man named Richard Smoke was convicted in the assault, which the presiding judge said was just short of really culpable homicide, on another builder in a slightly different part of town. He was attacked at a house he was building for his daughter, Sam Galtieri, and left with permanent brain damage.
Yeah, he had depression and ringing noises in his ears. I mean, this man will not function properly ever again.
And what you have to understand about Sam is that he was, he's a small builder. Everybody involved in this is a small operation. And he was the kind of guy who would nimbly fly up ladders and march across roofs. And we all know men who are good at this kind of thing, who have that tremendous physical confidence, and he's lost that. That's really the thing that he's lost the most, that I think probably hurts him the most. It was just minimized. First, people denied it had happened, then they blamed it on him for provoking it by somehow not leaving his house unattended as he should have, so that people could rummage through it and steal things.
He heard people in the house.
Yes, he was just driving by to check at the end of the day. The site itself, Sterling Woods, I think it was called, was now one of the new occupied sites. And that's the other thing about the Caledonia occupation. It originally involved just this one building site, but over the next 2 or 3 years, those little mini occupations spread all throughout southwestern Ontario. Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo, all sorts of other building sites found themselves with natives claiming some sort of ownership of the land. And in most cases, not all, Brantford, I don't know how many occupations they had, but their police force was a little better than the OPP, and they actually made some arrests. But there were businesses driven out, hotels that weren't built, plazas that didn't get occupied. It was quite astonishing.
The politics is important here to a degree, But many of the protesters are, if they are native, they're from native tribes that come a long way from Ontario. A lot of them are not native anyway. They're anarchists, and they're there because they want to cause trouble.
Yep.
But even if the claim is mildly valid, these people are breaking the law on a daily basis, and the police are choosing, it seems, to do nothing.
Well, they did, and it went against the instinct of the good police officer, and most OPP officers are good cops, of course. Cops become cops because they want to protect the vulnerable, generally. Sure. And, you know, when an elderly couple from nearby Simcoe was set upon by a gang of masked protesters, the cops did not intervene to protect them. Finally, one officer did, when, you know, there were skirmishes, lawlessness, people, you know, blocking roads. The cops were told from almost the get-go, from the day this began, that they were not to police this occupation as they would any other occupation in the world. In other words, if you decided to occupy a bakery in your area, you would last 5 minutes, and the Toronto police would be there and arrest you. If I did the same thing, but because they were Aboriginal Canadians, and because of the history of what happened at Ipperwash when Dudley George was killed by the OPP, this is a very guilt-ridden, nervous province at the moment, government I mean, and the institutions of government, one of which, one way or the other, is the Ontario Provincial Police. They were made to wear it. They didn't follow their own procedures. They didn't do what their hearts told them to do. They succumbed to, you know, the notion that no Native Canadian, no Aboriginal citizen can be anything other than a victim. And that's really the bottom line.
Stay with us. There's a lot more from the book also. I want to ask you what happened to you when you dared to actually discuss the book in public.
Sure.
Stay with us, please. Welcome back to the arena. If you didn't buy this book, Helpless, by the way, when it came out in hardback, shame on you. Buy it in paperback now because it's cheaper, and even better because there's an afterword as well by Christie Blatchford. By the way, just before I forget, though, I've got to ask you this. Beyond Caledonia, when you wrote this book, and you know, I don't really even know what your politics are. I think they're all over the place. It's pretty pragmatic. And you're very empathetic towards the native cause as well. You're not condemning all natives, far from it. But when you wrote the book, you went to give a lecture. Was it in Waterloo?
University of Waterloo.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, I think there were 3, though I never actually saw them because I wasn't allowed to go on the stage. But there were a number of people, I think 2 or 3, who had chained themselves with bicycle chains to the stage just near the podium. And there were a lot of protesters apparently in the audience, as well as a lot of people who wanted to hear me speak. And they took the university by surprise, and out of an abundance of caution, they canceled the speech. But they did have me back later, and I went back, and you know, now of course they were prepared, and nobody got in, and who didn't have a ticket, which were free, but you had to register. And it was a perfectly civil night. And I had a few protests in other places on the book tour, but they were always, you know, people who wanted to engage, and that's fine. I talk, they talk. I talk, they talk. That's how it works.
But they were protesting that you dared to write about the issue.
Well, I don't read websites because I don't spend a lot of time online because I find it a place of, you know, viciousness and
lunacy and hatred.
Yes, yeah,
degree.
Pretty much. But I'm told, and I saw a few of these. You know, I was being accused of being racist for having taken this approach of not going out and getting the Native side. Well, the Native side was the only story that was told for the first 4 years of this occupation, and it wasn't told particularly well either. My interest was in the rule of law. I'm a court reporter, and that's what I set out to do. So. Yeah, the reaction's astonishing, but you know, as I was reminded again recently, when you step outside the very careful lines of the conversation that Canadians allow, whether it's about healthcare or gay marriage or any number of things, if you step outside those lines, you will be punished, and you will be punished by protests, name-calling, all the usual juvenile tricks.
Or you get a job on Sun News.
Yes, there's that too.
And also the agenda with Steve Paikin. Now, Steve Paikin's a really good fella.
He's a lovely fella.
Very fair-minded. And you went on that show, but other people wouldn't join you?
He wanted to have a discussion about the book, and he invited people from Six Nations.
Take your hand away from your microphone.
Sorry, from Six Nations, from the Ontario Provincial Police, from the government to come on and engage in this discussion. They all refused. So I ended up being just me on the show by myself, and you know, it was nice promotion, I suppose, for the book, but it was really frustrating. It was frustrating for Steve, whose people tried very hard to get others on the show to have a proper discussion. But no one will engage on subjects like this.
The issue of the police, because for years you've written some of the best reporting on the police, the everyday experience of the police and so on. And I mean, I know many cops who I mean, they love you. But you and Fantino, who's now a government minister, isn't he? You didn't get along, and you were, although you tried to understand why OPP officers were frustrated, you were certainly, I think, fairly hard in both senses on the OPP.
I was certainly hard on the senior ranks of the OPP, absolutely. And I was hard, too, you're right, on the rank and file, because as one cop, who is David Hartless, who is a resident of Caledonia, of the affected area, and also a Hamilton regional police officer, and a very good one, he was, Fantino attempted to silence him, actually, by complaining to his chief, because Hartless had signs outside on his private residence saying, you know, speaking out against the OPP style of policing. So yeah, I was hard on Fantino, but I have no axe to grind with him. He and I had a very good professional relationship over 14 or 15 years of his long career. And then suddenly he became the police chief no one recognized as the commissioner of the OPP. You know, the gun-toting, hard-talking Julian Fantino was nowhere, and he didn't start that. He wasn't the commissioner when it began, but he took over pretty early on, and he kept the same conciliatory, we must all be friends, can't we just move forward, you know, sort of BS, which permeates government speak.
So people were beaten up, they were attacked, they were assaulted, some with injuries that will go on for the rest of their lives. People, property prices must have plummeted. People weren't allowed to go back to their homes, worked hard for these homes. These are not even luxury homes, for goodness sake, because of a government and a police force's obsessive fear of seeming to be politically incorrect on the native issue.
Yes, and what's more, the police stood by for, I think, 2 weeks of that worst period in the summer of 2006, while ordinary Caledonia residents were trying to go to and from their homes. The natives had erected barricades, and the natives issued passports to residents of the citizens of this country, which they were required to show in order to get to their homes. They imposed curfews. They subjected these people to arbitrary search and seizure. All of these things, all of these issues upon which, for instance, the Canadian Civil Liberties Union said absolutely nothing.
What did the NDP say, by the way?
Absolutely nothing.
I have to segue, because in the last minute we have Jack Layton, may he rest in peace. I knew Jack, I like the man. He's gone. I'm sorry for Olivia, his partner. You wrote a piece. I wrote a much harsher piece. You were very fair. You merely said, sorry he's gone, but this is becoming a bit obsessive. This public grief is becoming a little neurotic. I saw some of the emails, some of the things that were said about you. The filthy language. My God, these people loved Jack so much that they could hate very easily, couldn't they?
Well, especially considering people were purporting to embrace his last words, love is better than hate, blah, blah, blah. And their first reaction when somebody wasn't singing from the songbook, and you're quite right. I mean, I knew Jack too, and unlike many of the people who are so quick to deify him, I wrote very kind things about him when he was still alive, which is when it matters. But I thought the reaction was over the top. I don't like public shows of mourning, never have, don't understand them. Strangers clinging together, posing for the cameras with tears streaming down their faces for someone they never met is not a thing that sits well with me. And that's all I said in the thing. And I also said that Jack's last letter, and of course it would be this, because he was political in every fiber of his being, was a political document. Stephen Lewis, days later, got a standing ovation at Jack Layton's funeral for calling it a manifesto. I called it a manifesto, and I get 3,000 hateful emails. It's just unreal. The left does not take kindly to...
No, it doesn't. By the way, last question, very simple one. Stephen Lewis, is he immortal?
Is he immortal?
Yeah.
Not any recognizable way that I know. I agree with you.
I just wondered. Christie, thank you for many things, and thank you for this book, and I mean that.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Pleasure.